Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. It's Matty here, and welcome back to Meta Monday, the weekly series where we analyze the Pokemon Pocket metagame and keep you guys up to date on everything going on in the competitive world of Pokemon Pocket. This is what I'm really excited about. So if you didn't know, we've been advertising it all last week. We had our official own community PocketMads tournament yesterday on Sunday, and it went really well. I want to give a big shout out to everybody that participated in the tournament, everybody that helped out, all of the judges and the moderators and all of the people in the Discord. It actually went pretty well, better than I could have expected for our first tournament, and we had a really great showing. Over 450 people participated on Sunday, and again, this was our first tournament, so it was really cool to see. Again, big shout out to everybody, and congrats to everyone that placed well in the tournament. Some people have already been asking if we're going to do another tournament. I don't know. It's a big time commitment, of course, and we need money for the prize pool. So we'll probably do another one in the future because it was really fun, but nothing confirmed yet, so stay tuned. Definitely a lot of fun, but we'll see what happens in the upcoming weeks and things like that. But anyway, guys, we're going to go ahead and feel free to use the timestamps down in the description below. We're going to talk about the final standings. We'll cover all of the deck lists, and then we'll break down the the metagame tab and all of the data and the results from that perspective. So yeah, don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's dive right into it. So these are the final standings. They might be a little bit surprising to some of you guys. One thing I will say about our tournament this weekend was that we had a massive collection, a very dense collection of very high-level skilled players participating. I don't know why that was the case, but a lot of competition this weekend, which I think was a really healthy environment. So tons of really great players that did well in this tournament. And honestly, I also played myself. I played Raikou, and I went 5-5. We got a little bit unlucky in the Swiss rounds. We did not make top cut, but it was a good time as well. Shout out to everybody that joined the live stream. So here are the final standings. So Nabrix here from going 14-3. So one thing you'll notice about this tournament was that the first phase of the tournament was actually best of 1, and there were 10 rounds. So we did sort of a little bit of a different format. We wanted the tournament to go a little bit quicker, so we did more rounds, but less total, I guess, time for each of those rounds. So Nabrix here did get first place with Guzzlord, went 14-3, and then we had Denny Maton. I don't know how to say the names. I apologize. From Spain, he went 13-4, and that was second place with Suicune and Greninja. Now we had J-Hove or J-Hove. I don't know. Again, I'm horrible with the names. I got third place, 12-3 and 1 with Dragonite and Sylveon. So yes, Dragonite did make top 4 at this tournament. How Poke from Japan did go 12-4, fourth place with Giratina Darkrai. And we actually here, Typhoon had a Raikou and Magnezone in 5th place. We had a Turbo Flareon here in 6th place. And then we had a couple more Suicune and Greninjas filling out top 8, Corndog and Sass. So big shout out to all of those guys. Now, if we go outside of top 8, a lot more interesting stuff is to be seen. Of course, 2 Silvally Rampardos is at 9th and 10th place. We had a Tapu Koko Oricorio list at 11th, another Suicune at 12th, Guzzlord at 13th. We had another Suicune at 14th. We had a Silvally and Oricorio deck go all the way here at 15th place, another Suicune at 16th, and we actually had this really cool Umbreon deck at 17th place. And if we go down here, so this I believe was like a top 64 asymmetrical cut. A lot of really cool decks made top cut here at this tournament, as we see a Giratina and Latias deck. If we go down here, some Turbo Dark Arceus, we see a Silvally Giratina deck, we see a Raikou and Pikachu deck list, some more Dragonites as well. A really interesting thing about this tournament was Dragonite's performance, as well as the performances of other really top decks. So let's break down the deck lists here, starting with, of course, the #1 placing deck, Guzzlord. So I actually was really high on Guzzlord coming into this weekend. I personally feel like Guzzlord is the Pokemon that people never really consider to be a top meta contender, but then always ends up being a top meta contender. It's just a really strong card. And the cool thing about Guzzlord is that it's actually very flexible. The entire Dark Ultra Beast package was very relevant last season, but it was played as an aggressive, fast-paced deck with the Naganadel and the Poison. Guzzlord has kind of changed up its its strategy going into the season, mainly to counter things like Suicune, which of course does more damage based around how many Pokemon are on your bench and your opponent's bench. Guzzlord here is a Pokemon with a ton of HP that can deal chip damage with Rocky Helmet and Grindcore. Again, 2 energies, colorless. We can deal a decent amount of damage. It helps cover Oricorio as well, but we can kind of survive with just a Guzzlord on the bench, which is going to minimize the amount of damage that Suicune can do to you by, of course, only 60 at the most, right? And then 80 or 100, I guess, if they have Greninjas on the board, but we're discarding their energies in the process. So it's a very interesting counterplay to to something like a Suicune. And then, of course, we have Will, we have Red, we have 2 Pokemon Center ladies, and a potion as well to stay alive for that much longer. And then a bunch of 1-ups because we're slowly going to be moving through our deck list. And then, of course, Lucamine to set up that second Guzzlord, or I guess attack with Celesteela if we need to. I think Guzzlord was very, very well positioned. If you take a look at a lot of the decks that are seeing a lot of play currently in this format, it's a lot of things like Suicune, which, of course, this Guzzlord deck is kind of built directly to counterplay Suicune, but Giratina Darkrai seeing a lot of play, of course. Some of these Lightning-type decks, which can't deal a ton of damage and require, or I guess are a little bit reliant on having a lot of energies really early on, are also kind of countered by Guzzlord. So I think that Guzzlord in general, just very, very well positioned. It was actually, I think, the second or third most played deck of this tournament. We'll have to wait and see. It was definitely the most successful deck getting first place. We'll see how its average win rate was. I think this Guzzlord list is actually just really strong. And again, I think it really comes down to the fact that Guzzlord is a really interesting Pokemon, and this metagame right now is very much reliant on having strong early starts, but then being sort of bolstered by, really, I guess, strong late game potential, right? Decks like Suicune with Giratina with Greninja they have the potential to deal a lot of damage from turn 2 going forward, but they're really strong in the late game with those Greninjas, with Giratina, with Cyrus. Guzzlord really kind of eliminates a lot of those win conditions that Suicune has, and I think it really positions Guzzlord to be in a really good spot. It's actually single-handedly kind of pushed Espeon out of the format this season, so Espeon is something that people might be curious about. It did not see a lot of play this weekend, and in fact, I really would move off of Espeon right now. I did see a Japanese player, I believe, playing like an Espeon deck that wasn't playing Sylveon, so it was just playing 2 Espeon to again try to counteract that matchup into Suicune. But I think Guzzlord in general is just such a strong card into Espeon that I can't really see many people. I can't really justify playing Espeon in this format, but especially in those early days or last week, I think Espeon was still seeing play, and Guzzlord, of course, sort of fed on those matchups as well. A really, really strong deck. Giratina is a really common as well. There's a lot of times where Guzzlord is actually facing down a Giratina in the active spot, and hitting for weakness and discarding those energies really is a big deal. This Guzzlord deck is phenomenally well positioned. However, the dominance of Guzzlord in this weekend's tournament actually did kind of result in another deck list having a little bit of, I think, an advantage, which we'll break down in a little bit. I guess I'll just spoil it for you. We're talking about Dragonite. Dragonite is one of those few decks that I think really did benefit, actually, from Guzzlord being really popular this weekend. It's a really strong deck. I would say it's really the leading that counter meta charge. But as we kind of go into the second week and then into the third week, I think the counter meta is going to be maybe less prevalent, and it's really just about everything becoming really well balanced. It's actually a progression of the season that I did not expect to happen, how quickly the counter meta emerged and how quickly everything sort of balanced out from there. So it's actually a really interesting thing. If you take a look at the standings here, of course, there's a lot of Suicune. We've talked about it. I think Suicune is the strongest deck. It's counterplayed a lot heavily. It lost to Guzzlord in the finals, but, a bunch of Suicune Greninja decks right here, right? I mean, all the way into top 16, there was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them, right? So 6 out of top 16 was still Suicune, and it was the most played deck, still very successful as well. But anyway, let's take a look at Denny's list, and this is going to be Suicune and Greninja, the highest placing Suicune Greninja deck, which is kind of the standard at this point. I think most people have settled on the single Giratina, but what we're starting to see is a couple of interesting tech inclusions in this deck, as sort of the 19th, 20th card, right? So, of course, 2 Greninja, 2 Froakie, 2 Suicune, 1 Giratina. That's the standard. 2 Research, 2 Irida, and then, of course, 2 Pokeball, 2 Rare Candy. That's the stuff that you're going to see in this deck basically all of the time. This player here was playing only 1 copy of Cyrus, but they were playing 1 copy of Leaf, 1 copy of Mars, and 1 copy of Repel, so which I think is actually a really smart deal here. So I think that Mars is just a really strong card, and you should probably play it in any deck that is playing any 2 prize Pokemon. Specifically in Suicune, I definitely think it's a good deal because Suicune is going to be drawing cards. One of the main strengths to Suicune is that it's very consistent in the late game because you're drawing so many cards. But the interesting inclusions for this list here are the 1 copy of Leaf and the 1 copy of Repel. So I think what was really smart about the Suicune list is that the 1 copy of Leaf is there to kind of counteract those early Repel plays that we've seen time and time again that I've been sort of recommending to counterplay Suicune. A big reason why Suicune is strong is because it can kind of oftentimes, be in the active spot and then attach for a couple of turns, especially going second. That early damage combined with the amount of cards you're drawing by parking Suicune in the active spot really makes the deck quite strong, and a significant counterplay to that is Repel. That's why I've been kind of playing Repel with Raikou as a counter meta deck, but this player here playing 1 copy of Leaf to help counteract that. It also allows you to retreat with Giratina. You could play the inflatable boat, you could play X speed, but Leaf is kind of a similar type card. It might be a little bit awkward. There are some turns even in the early game that we want to play that Irida if we get attacked early, but for the most part I think that 1 copy of Leaf, any card to help you retreat out, is going to be a really strong counterplay to some of those early Repel plays. Now, why is this deck that is also weak to Repel playing Repel? Well, I think it really comes down to the mirror match. Jody made a video recently shout out to Jody, made a video really talking about the mirror matchup, and I think that if you're going to play Suicune, you have to be comfortable in that matchup, and this player here, I think playing one copy of Repel was really smart. It gives you definitely that advantageous option for that early game in the mirror matchup, but it's also a strong card into a variety of other deck lists, right? And I think that's a really big deal. Things like Espeon, which again aren't seeing that much play, but even Silvally deck lists, which are common for lightning type decks, and Oricorio as well, Repel is definitely going to be pretty valuable. So a really strong list here. Again, cutting one Cyrus out of the deck list, but playing one Leaf and one Repel in place of that Cyrus. I actually really like this strategy. Again, kind of accounting for the counter meta, but also accounting for the mirror matchup, I think, to some degree. Again, these are cards that are useful really in any application, but specifically, I think for those reasons, definitely strong inclusions here. So this would be like an updated Suicune Gridinta deck, one that I actually quite like, and I would actually recommend. I think this was a really smart way to play Suicune, so shout out to Danny for sure. Now, in third place, let's talk about this Dragonite deck. I know a lot of people are going to be curious about this, and they're going to be wondering, is Dragonite meta? Now, I think it's actually a bit poetic, a bit ironic that in the PocketMads tournament, Dragonite almost ended up winning. If Dragonite won this tournament, I would have second-guessed everything I know about Pokemon Pocket. Now, this player played very well. So in my experience watching this player play in the matches that he streamed and that we watched on the live stream, he was playing this deck extremely well. But let's break down this deck and let's talk about it a little bit. So this is going to be Dragonite, 2 copies of Giratina, no Dragonair, but 2 copies of Dragonite EX, and then 1 copy of the non-EX Dragonite, and then 2 Rare Candy. But we are also playing 2 Eevee and 2 Sylveon, specifically to draw cards in the deck list, and then 2 copies of Pichu. So you might be wondering, is this deck playing dual energies? It's not. And in fact, I would say that that's actually probably the most significant factor of this deck list that is different than other Dragonite decks, is that we are actually only playing water energies in our energy zone, and we're only playing Pichu. Most Dragonite decks are playing dual energies, and they're playing Mantike and Pichu. This player here, I guess, kind of really determined that he would rather never have to struggle having the both different types of energies on the Dragonite. So he would just play single water energy in his energy zone and only Pichu. And that way you're basically guaranteed, as long as you can get Pichu on the board, that Dragonite is ready to go. And I actually feel like it's a pretty successful and a pretty, I guess, it's a more consistent way to play Dragonite. When you're playing Dragonite, you have to focus on 2 things specifically. One is getting both a water and lightning energy onto Dragonite, right, which can be a problem. But the other issue is drawing enough cards to draw into your Rare Candy combo. So we got to get the 3 energies onto Dragonite, but we also have to find Dragonite and we have to find Rare Candy. So this deck list really aims to do that in the most consistent way possible, and that is, of course, playing 2 copies of Sylveon to draw a bunch of cards in our deck, and of course only playing Pichu and water energies to guarantee, or rather make it a little bit more consistent, that we're going to get at least 1 water and 1 lightning energy onto Dragonite. The other cards in this deck are 2 copies of Lyra and 2 Pokeball, and then 1 Silver. So very bare bones deck. I think when you're playing Dragonite, you never have to worry about playing Sabrina or Cyrus or Red or anything like that, right? Those are cards that are often in deck lists, but Dragonite just does 180 damage, right? So we're KOing whatever's in the active spot, and it's not something we really have to worry about. So we don't have to play any of those cards, and I think we take advantage of that. The Sylveons in here in other deck lists that play Sylveon typically play a lot of one-ofs of a lot of different cards that are useful in different applications. And it's very consistent that we have those cards. But Sylveon in this deck list is literally here to just draw the few cards that we need to make Dragonite work, and I think it makes the deck very consistent. The Lyra is there to pair with Pichu, or really any other Pokemon on the bench, to, of course, after you attack with Dragonite, if you do get attacked, you can kind of call your opponent's bluff and say, listen, I will attack you 2 turns in a row. And Dragonite is a little bit scary because if you know your opponent has Lyra, and by the way, they oftentimes do because they've drawn so many cards with Sylveon, you're kind of forced to not attack Dragonite. And if we're not attacking Dragonite, we probably lose the game. And that's really how this deck list goes. Quite frankly, it's just about getting Dragonite set up and then basically winning because your opponent doesn't have any counterplay to that. No giant capes here, and of course, no healing cards, which is definitely pretty interesting, but again, the whole concept here is that Dragonite also has 180 HP, right? Unlike Lugia, it can't really get KO'd very easily. So if we come in with Dragonite and we attack, we don't have to worry about healing, we don't have to worry about gusting or doing more damage. We just have to worry about getting it set up. So this deck is all about maximum consistency on the Dragonite. And then the last card here is the 1 copy of Silver, and I think this is actually a very valuable card. And I think that it's mostly valuable for a couple of reasons, but predominantly it's used as a defensive mechanism late in the game. After you come in with Dragonite and you're about to attack and KO your opponent's Pokemon, Pokemon, you can play that Silver on that turn, right, and guarantee that you can kind of remove a particular win condition supporter card from your opponent's hand, whether that's a Cyrus, whether it's a Sabrina, whether it's a Red, whether it's a Mars. Those are cards that Dragonite, of course, could lose to, right? We have Sylveons on the bench. We might have a Pichu on the bench. So your opponent is really one card away from beating you, right? Oftentimes when you get that first attack off with Dragonite. So the one copy of Silver is there to counteract that from happening. And again, it's very often that we have that card because we're drawing so many cards with 2 Research and 2 Sylveon. It's a really, really fun deck. In all my games watching this player here, I never actually saw him use the non-EX Dragonite. So I don't know if he would recommend playing it. Of course, it's probably better than not having any Dragonite. So it kind of does make sense. But the 4 energies probably makes it a little bit harder to use that Pokemon's attack. But either way, it's definitely a very interesting deck list. Now let's talk about the viability of Dragonite, quite frankly. Because this player here did make it all the way to 3rd place, which is very, very impressive, especially considering all of the competition in this tournament. But is Dragonite a really, is it a real meta contender, I guess, is the question. Some people are going to see this result, and they're going to go ahead and play Dragonite on the ladder. One thing I'll tell you is that I think Dragonite's performances this weekend might have been a little bit inflated due to just the other decks that saw play. Of course, Suicune, Giratina Darkrai, and Guzzlord. These are all decks that don't really have great answers to Dragonite, and I think Dragonite really took advantage of that. One thing you have to keep in mind, right? Even if Dragonite performed well in this very competitive tournament, Dragonite is a high roll deck. And I'm not saying that as like a bad thing. High roll decks have been relevant in the metagame for quite some time, but they've actually been absent for the last couple of formats, I feel like. Dragonite and Charizard didn't really see a lot of play last season, but this season I think there's a weird, I guess just like a... in general, just like a need for high roll decks. I think there's definitely a place in the metagame for a deck like this. And quite honestly, with Guzzlord being so common in the format, things like Charizard, which only hit for 150, just don't feel nearly as good. So I think that the rise of Guzzlord has opened up a little bit of space for things like Dragonite, as well as kind of the slower nature of Suicune and Giratina Darkrai, as opposed to, of course, some other aggro decks that are, of course, in the game. So yeah, how do I feel about Dragonite? Listen, it's inconsistent. This is not a consistent deck list. It's a high roll deck, right? So you got to get lucky. You got to get everything that happens for you. And then if it all happens properly, yeah, you probably will win because Dragonite is so strong. But excuse me, sometimes some of those games you're going to do nothing. And that's what high roll decks are, right? They're extremely strong when they work, but they work less often than a lot of other deck lists. So, that's what we mean by high roll, right? They're just a little bit more random. They're a little bit more luck based, but extremely strong on the high end, very weak on the low end, right? This player here happened to, of course, be a really strong player, had a maximum consistency high roll deck, and it ended up doing very well for him. But unfortunately, it doesn't always work out for most players, right? So keep that in mind. Dragonite, I think, is actually fairly good, and I think this is probably my favorite Dragonite list that I've seen so far. But don't go thinking that Dragonite is going to be like an S tier deck this coming tier list Tuesday. Definitely a strong choice, a strong player, and a strong run with Dragonite, but don't overhype Dragonite. I'm not flying off the shelves here, about Dragonite. But anyway, at 4th place, we do have Giratina Darkrai. So, this wouldn't be a Pokemon Pocket tournament without Giratina Darkrai doing well in the tournament. I would say that Giratina Darkrai was a totally fine position deck list. Like, it's hard for me to really justify or I guess explain Giratina Darkrai. Other than that, it's a totally fine deck, and it was definitely fairly well positioned, and it of course did well. Like, Giratina Darkrai, I think, hasn't fully taken over the last few metagames, but has been a significant player for quite some time. Espeon not being in the format, Guzzlord being very common. I would say right now, really the only inherent strength of Giratina Darkrai is probably the matchup into Suicune. It does have a favorable matchup into Suicune, and I think that really kind of chalks down to why Giratina Darkrai probably has some relevance currently in this metagame. Just like last season, it was good against Espeon, and that was really kind of it, you know what I mean? So here's Giratina Darkrai, the highest placing list here. Nothing really jumps out to me. They are playing one copy of Repel. Shout out to Repel. We are in the Repellion right now. It is by far one of the most influential cards in this current season, so I've been talking about it in various videos, but shout out to Repel, a very strong deck. Everything else in here is fairly standard. The one Guzma, the one Red, the one Cyrus, the one Leaf, one Mars, one Repel. It's just a bunch of one-ofs. That's what Giratina Darkrai does. It just sort of slowly draws its cards. It plays them as it comes, as the cards come, and it just sort of sets up. You know what I mean? We all know Giratina Darkrai. But anyway, shout out to this player here. Shout out to How. Now, the interesting thing to me, one of the most interesting things, was actually this Raikou Magnezone deck going 12, 2, and 1, 5th place. Shout out to Typhoon. So, Raikou and Magnezone is actually something that I haven't been that high on for a while now. I still don't feel like Magnezone is the best way to play Raikou, but, you know, the numbers don't lie. This player did exceptionally well, and quite frankly, I think that it is a fine deck list. It's hard to really, you know, take one tournament result and inflate it, right? I think if we take a look at the average win rate this tournament for Raikou Magnezone, it probably wouldn't be that high, but it's certainly a deck that could win games, you know what I mean? And especially in Swiss, when you get into best of one, anyone can beat anybody. You know, it's just sort of how the tournament structure works. And then in Top Cut, you know, it really just kind of comes down to, again, variance and matchups. So I'm sure this player played this deck very, very well. I do like this deck. I'm not saying I don't like Raikou and Magnezone. The Magneton Volt Charge with Elemental Switch and Raikou acts a little bit like Zeraora in our Tapu Koko Pikachu Raikou deck. And then we have one copy of Oricorio, which of course I'm not as high on Oricorio this season as I was previous seasons, but I still think Magnezone is a fairly strong card. Again, it's not a bad deck list. Do I think it's the best way to play Raikou right now? I mean, I don't feel that to be the case, but you got to keep in mind that we're no longer really in the significant sort of counter meta portion of the season. We have developed past that, and we are almost in a fully come full circle moment here this season. And deck lists like this, like Dragonite, like Guzzlord, are just strong decks that can always win games. So they have to be respected, even though they might not be like specifically super hard countering, you know, any particular deck. This is a lightning type deck, right? Magnezone can do pretty significant damage into a Suicune, so the math does kind of work out. 10 damage from the Raikou, maybe sniping a Suicune on the bench, allows you to 1-hit KO with Magnezone, right? So there's certain things like that. We are playing 2 Cyrus, we're playing Pokemon Center Lady, Giant Cape, and X-Speed. I like this deck list, I really do. So it's hard for me to say. I think Raikou has more potential than people think. I think it deserves to see more play. Other Raikou players did well, but this week it was Raikou Magnezone that was actually the #1 Raikou deck, and I think that's really cool. Definitely a surprising result, but again, you know, strong players, getting good variants, hitting good matchups, and drawing the cards well, you know, anything can really happen. So no disrespect at all to Typhoon, but a surprising result to see Raikou and Magnezone here in 5th place. It's been floating around for the last week or two. Definitely not a terrible deck list. M. Dean here from Great Britain was playing Turbo Flareon. So let's talk about Flareon, because I actually expected Flareon to do a little bit more, place, well, I guess I say place higher, but it actually got, what, like 6th place in this tournament? I think that Turbo Flareon's very strong. There's really nothing else I can say about it. I think that it's another sort of high roll deck. One of the most polarizing decks this tournament was Turbo Dark Arceus, which is basically the same thing as this, but instead of Flareon, we're playing Arceus and Darkrai. So it's a very similar type of deck list here. It's just about, you know, are we getting the combo off early game? You know, if we are, like, you're probably going to lose, because hitting for 130 plus on turn 2 is not something really any deck can deal with, quite frankly. You're probably going to lose if your Pokemon gets KO'd, right? And your opponent takes 2 prizes on your second turn. 2 EV bag, 2 red, and look at that, 1 copy of Repel as well. It's a strong deck. It really is, right? It's a high roll deck. It's a turbo high roll deck that is, of course, you know, not bad in the mid to late game, but is really, bolstered in strength by its ability to be up and running on turn 2. And that's really, I think, what this deck is kind of all about. So I like this deck. Magby lead going second is absolutely insane. But again, it's a deck that can struggle against some other stuff if it doesn't get online early enough. I like Flareon. I think that it's good into Giratina Darkrai, and it's also good, of course, into Suicune, which is an interesting thing with Flareon. I think this has been a pretty standard list. We have 2 Sylveon in this list instead of 1, and only 1 Flamethrower Flareon. You can kind of swap these in terms of their count. You could play 2 Flamethrower Flareon and then 1 Sylveon EX, but honestly, I don't think Oricorio was that common, so I think 1 Flareon, Genetic Apex Flareon is probably correct. I don't know, maybe Guzzlord had something to say about this. I can kind of see how Guzzlord just eating a hit from Flareon, and then you discard the energies with Grindcore and they can't attack the next turn. I can see how that would be pretty detrimental to the matchup, quite frankly. You're also forced to take damage when you use Combust, so Flareon can attack turn after turn, but if you get that 1 energy discarded, you're no longer able to attack turn after turn, so maybe the matchup into Guzzlord did kind of slow Flareon down a little bit. Again, I would say the biggest news this tournament really was about Guzzlord and then, of course, Dragonite, but Turbo Flareon still a very, very strong deck. Cornball and Sass were both playing Suicune and Greninja. I'm not going to showcase those because I can't showcase every Suicune deck. I'm sure they're somewhat similar. But let's take a look here at Silvally Rampardos real quick, because Silvally Rampardos is also a very interesting deck. Again, I think that the meta coming around full circle, just whatever the case is, I think that Silvally and Rampardos is a strong deck. I think that it's more so about certain deck lists not being in the metagame anymore that makes this matchup particularly relevant. One thing I will say, though, is that this is a deck that to me seems like like it would be counterplayed by Repel pretty heavily, but maybe, maybe that's not as big of a factor for whatever the reason. But things like Buzzwole or really any grass deck right now is not seeing a lot of play, and I think that really is one of the biggest factors to Silvally. I'm trying to think. I believe that Buzzwole was the deck that really kind of pushed Silvally really out of meta contention, quite frankly. And I think that Buzzwole just really isn't seeing a lot of play right now. But since Buzzwole's not seeing a lot of play, that probably means that it's a fairly well-positioned deck list, especially if Guzzlord ends up being a highly played deck, right? Guzzlord traditionally gets countered by Buzzwole, so maybe we do end up seeing some more Buzzwole as the season progresses. But for right now, Buzzwole doesn't see play, and I think that's a big reason why Silvally Rampardos, again, is a fairly relevant, deck list. It did well. And honestly, a lot of people who played in this tournament were viewers of the channel, so I think there was maybe a bit of an uptick in these sort of Lightning Raikou decks seeing play, because that's the deck that I've been playing for quite some time. But anyway, Silvally Rampardos at 9th and 10th place, which is a fairly interesting, I guess, result. But yeah, there we go. 057 from Japan was playing Tapu, Koko, Oricorio. Let's take a look at this list. A very simple list, but I think, honestly, probably my favorite way to just play an Oricorio deck right now. I think that Tapu Koko is actually one of the better leadoff Pokemon into Suicune, right? If you go second, you can hit for 40 with weakness, and then you can hit for 110 with weakness on turn 2. So going second into Suicune, it's actually a really difficult matchup for them to kind of stay on pace, and they also have to deal with Oricorio. It's a really strong deck. Now, we're not playing Repel here, but we are playing one Sabrina, one Silver, one Pokemon Center Lady, one Giovanni. So a lot of one-ofs in the deck list. I think this is just a really strong kind of aggro blend to Oricorio. It kind of functions quite similarly, to be fair, to like Silvally and Oricorio, but I think that Tapu Koko specifically is just a really strong card into Suicune, right? So I really like Tapu Koko, and I think that, honestly, if you're wanting to play like an actual core, like an Oricorio deck, there's not many decks playing 2 copies of Oricorio, but if you are going to play a double Oricorio deck, I honestly kind of feel like this is probably your best bet, if I'm being entirely honest with you. Against Guzzlord, it can actually end up pretty funny. We're not playing Guzma in this deck, but I would maybe recommend playing Guzma for those Rocky Helmets in both the Giratina Darkrai matchup, but also in the Guzzlord matchup. That can maybe allow us to kind of just clear that matchup with Oricorio against Guzzlord. Maybe, maybe not. We'll have to see. But anyway, 1 Rocky Helmet, 1 Potion, 1 Giant Cape, 2 Red Card as well. So a bit of a disruptive Oricorio deck. Again, it's kind of counter to Suicune, which I think is definitely pretty cool. But Tapu Koko is an underrated card. We do play it in our Raikou deck. So a very, very cool deck list there for sure. And if we go down here, this is going to be, this is going to be Oricorio Silvally. So a very similar deck. If you're not playing the Tapu Koko Oricorio deck, this is sort of the standard, right? This is the stuff that's been around for a very, very long time. The upside to playing a deck list like this is that we're playing only single prize Pokemon. We're not specifically counterplaying Suicune as heavily, but we are playing, of course, only single prize Pokemon, which allows you to utilize either 2 Oricorio and a Silvally, or 2 Silvally and an Oricorio. I will say the Pichu and the Oricorios are definitely a bit of a liability into Suicune with all of those Greninjas, but that's just me. We are, of course, still talking about Silvally. It's still a card. It's still a good card. And Oricorio as well, why not, I guess. Decks like this, we can't be surprised if they do well in tournaments, right? And to be fair, we don't really have much else to say about it. It's just Silvally or Oricorio. It's been around since A3, and it's definitely been a pretty relevant deck. So pretty cool to see it performing well. One of my favorite decks from this tournament here at 17th place was actually Supreme 13 from, I guess, outer space or something. He's not from this planet. He was playing Umbreon, and Umbreon actually makes a lot of sense. Let's talk about Umbreon right now. I watched this player on stream. He did quite well with this deck list. This is actually just a 4 EV, 4 Umbreon deck. We do have 1 Sylveon EX to draw, and we do have 1 Darkrai EX to deal some additional damage with Nightmare Aura. The really cool thing about this deck is how well positioned the non-EX Umbreon is in the format right now. Again, if you take a look at all of the decks that are seeing play, whether it's Giratina Darkrai, whether it's Suicune, whether it's Raikou, I think I lost to this deck, in fact, in Swiss, or it's Guzzlord, all basic Pokemon. Most decks are just relying on basic Pokemon. The non-EX Umbreon with Dark Binding does 40 damage for 1 energy, and then your opponent's basic Pokemon can't attack on your next turn. That's a really big deal. That stops Suicune from being able to deal any significant damage in the early game. It stops Guzzlord from being able to grindcore you, and it allows us to basically stall the game, chip down an active Pokemon, to then KO it later in the game with the Umbreon EX, which of course is basically a Cyrus, a free Cyrus, which is a really, really strong card. So honestly, I think that Umbreon here is a quality deck list, but the big story here for me, as in terms of its viability and its positioning in this format right now, is going to be the the Dark Binding Umbreon, the non-EX Umbreon, and I think has actually put in a lot of work this past weekend in its matchups. Now, again, is this a deck list that I think is going to take over the metagame? Who knows? It's hard to say. It definitely seemed extremely strong in some scenarios, but nothing in this deck is dealing a tremendous amount of damage, so that's just a significant downside here. Things like Dragonite certainly are going to just absolutely steamroll you. Even like a Suicune deck with Greninjas getting set up might steamroll you. Magnezone might be something that's difficult to deal with. So there's a lot of stuff here. It definitely is a little bit matchup dependent, but a very, very unique list and a very, very cool deck. Umbreon having some success is really significant to me. One of my favorite things ever that's happened in tournaments this season is this Umbreon deck performing very, very well. So try it for yourself. Again, I think that the non-EX Umbreon specifically was very well positioned and put in a ton of work this tournament, which I think is really, really cool. So shout out to this player and shout out to Umbreon for getting a pretty high placement here at 17th place. We did have a Turbo Arceus deck, okay? So Turbo Arceus is still a deck. It has been declining in viability and in success since the beginning of the season. So is it something that I really, believe in very heavily? Probably not right now, but, we all know about Turbo, Lightning Arceus, Pichu, Zeraora, Energy Switch, Arceus, right? We're just about, there's a couple of these, I call these Turbo decks, decks that really should not be attacking on turn 2, but for whatever the reason, they have the tools to do that through the baby Pokemon or through Elemental Switch. We have Turbo Dark Arceus, we have Turbo Lightning Arceus, we have Turbo Flareon. These are cards with 3 energy attacks that can technically attack on turn 2. An incredible potential that these decks have, but overall, maybe a little bit less, or maybe a little bit more clanky, right? They're like early game high roll decks, per se. Another Tapu Koko Oricorio at 23rd place. And if we go down a little bit, let's take a look at Frog EX Numentale. Horrible with the names, I apologize. A friend of the channel, somebody who always plays in tournaments and always does well. By the way, shout out to Jody at 28th place, playing Suicune and Greninja. I don't want to pass over him. Shout out to Jody. But this player here, Numentale, again, I'm horrible with the names. 30th place was playing Giratina and Latias. So shout out to him for playing a very creative deck going into this tournament. One of the better players in the entire game. And this deck list does play 1 copy of Morty. So big shout out to the Morty here in the deck list. A really fun deck. To be fair, this deck is really all about, Broken Space Bellowing turn after turn with Giratina, setting up our Latios, and then hopefully either having Latias or Latios in the active spot, right? Latios does have free retreat. So Latias kind of acts as like the active Pokemon to kind of sit there and tank damage. And then by the time Latios gets set up, we can go 120 into Giratina EX 130. So it's kind of similar to like Mewtwo and Giratina, but it's just sort of not playing, of course, Mewtwo. It's just playing sort of the Latios combo. And the cool thing as well is that even if we don't have Giratina, we can actually play a fairly okay archetype here, where Latias can deal 40 damage if Latios is on the bench, and then for only 1 energy in those subsequent turns we can use to build up Latios. We are playing Psychic Energies in a Giratina deck, so we can have that turn 3 Chaotic Impact for 130. That does happen. That is a real thing in these Psychic type Giratina decks. It's something that is always underrated. We've got 2 Rocky Helmet and red, so a lot of extra damage modifiers here on top of Guzma. Then we have a PCL and a Giant Cape and a Repel, of course. Shout out to the Repel, and then a Mars and a Cyrus. This is a really fun deck. This is what I would call sort of a, an off meta, like a fringe meta deck list, right? It does make sense. It does have synergy, and it does have potential. Not something that you would really expect to take over the metagame, but certainly something that in the hands of a strong player could do very well. If this player here, if you're watching this video, definitely comment down below. If anybody that I talk about in this video is watching here, comment down below about your deck, any insight. We would love to hear it. Definitely big shout out to all of these players. So a very, very cool deck, a very, very unique deck list that I wanted to showcase. And then, of course, we've got right here, this is going to be Silvally Giratina. I don't know if you guys remember this. So this is like, you guys probably remember the old Silvally Giratina decks, maybe not, from a couple seasons ago, but we are playing One Mantike, right? So Silvally, a very strong card going second. One Mantike allows Silvally to be strong going first, but it also allows us here, if we're playing pure Psychic Energies, which we probably are, it allows us to attack technically on turn 3 with Giratina, which is pretty cool, right? So keep that in mind. So it's a bit of like a Turbo Giratina, Turbo Silvally deck. We actually haven't seen baby Pokemon with Giratina ever because they don't actually synergize very well at all. But theoretically speaking, if we are going first, we can use Mantike if it's in the active spot, or we can Broken Space Bellow. So it's kind of an option between the two. A very, curious deck list, of course, playing 2 red, 1 Cyrus, 2 Mars, 1 Team Rocket Grunt, and 2 Professor's Research. A bit of an awkward deck list for sure. Definitely not something that is commonly seen in the metagame, but again, it does sort of make a little bit of sense, right? I mean, it's Giratina. it's Silvally, it's Mantike, it's a deck that's going to win games sometimes, right? So a very unique deck list. Shout out to this player here. I love to see it. Turbo Dark Arceus. This was actually the #1 player after day one. Was actually playing Dark Riot Arceus, Turbo Dark Arceus. So this deck was playing 2 Kamala, which I find interesting. 4 EX Pokemon between 2 Darkrai, 2 Arceus, and then 4 baby Pokemon. I don't know the reasoning behind the 2 Kamala. Maybe he just definitely did not want to lose into Oricorio. I find that definitely to be interesting for sure. But he was playing 2 copies of Leaf, so I guess if you do lead Kamala, it's not that big of a deal. Again, this is sort of the other sort of turbo archetype here, where again, if we're going second, baby Pokemon plus Darkrai or baby Pokemon plus Arceus ends up being turn 2, 130 plus damage. Really, really strong. A really, really strong deck list, honestly. Now, the #1 player after day one who went, I think, 9-1, or yeah, he was either 9-1 or he went like 9 wins and 1 tie. I kind of forget. He was playing this deck list. This might have been the player, I don't know, but he was playing this archetype. So the #1 performing deck after day one of Swiss, which was again best of 1, was a Dark Arceus player here. So this is a deck that's been popping up recently. Definitely something to keep in mind for sure. Down here at 40th place, this will be the last deck we take a look at, is Turkey Pear. And he was playing Raikou Pikachu. So unfortunately, myself playing this version of this deck also went, of course, 5-5. This was something that I really wanted to play. It's one of my favorite decks right now. I was playing, of course, also 1 copy of Leaf and 1 Cyrus, but I do feel like the Leaf isn't nearly as useful as having that second Cyrus. I think we lost 2 games in Swiss by just not having Cyrus. Of course, this is a deck that was built originally to hard counter Suicune, right? And for a while, it definitely was an incredibly useful deck, and my win rate was very high in ranked battles. But as we've seen, of course, the counter meta around Suicune has already developed, and there's a lot of decks that aren't Suicune that you're going to run into. We ran into, I think, 2 Suicune decks in 10 games, and we won 1, and then we lost 1, unfortunately. But that's just the way it goes. So I really love this deck. It's one of my favorite Raikou decks, but as we did see, Raikou and Magnezone ended up being the most successful Raikou deck right now, this tournament, rather. A really, really fun deck. Again, I tried out the 1 Leaf. I think that the double Cyrus is better. I think it's just better to always have Cyrus as an option. We lost a couple of games by just not having the Cyrus. In fact, 1 game, Cyrus was literally the last card in our deck, which is definitely unfortunate and can happen, but I'm still really high on this deck. I still really like it. I don't know how it performed overall across the tournament, but again, it's a deck that does require you to sort of pair up against Suicune, right? That's sort of the whole point of building this deck list. Raikou is a really, really good card, but definitely isn't as strong into a bunch of other decks of the format. So a big shout out to Turkey Pear being the highest placing Raikou, Pikachu, Tapu, Koko player. And that's the results. That's all of the deck lists from this tournament. Again, big shout out to everybody that participated. Congrats to everybody that placed well. Thank you, by the way, very much to all of the community members and the moderators and the judges who helped make this tournament happen. Again, it was pretty overwhelming. We didn't expect to have this many players. The turnout was phenomenal for our first tournament. It was a little bit rocky at the beginning, but we kind of settled in, and I think it ended up being a really, really fun event. Okay, let's finish this video quickly by going over the metagame data. We do this because when we take a look at the standings and we take a look at all of the, the deck lists, it's of course very valuable information, but the real information comes here from the metagame tab. So let's break this all down. Okay, so the #1 most played deck at 22.2% of the meta share was Suicune and Greninja, 100 out of 450 people. Sadly, we only ran into 2 of them in our first 10 matches of the tournament. I had a 52% win rate, 443 to 407. That is actually very impressive. Like, that is a very, very impressive record for a deck that is basically being countered by everything else seeing play, as we see a lot of Lightning decks and Guzzlord here as tied for the second most played deck this tournament. But anyway, Suicune's still performing well. In my mind, it's probably still the strongest deck. Like, it's just generally like the best deck in the game. Again, it's being counterplayed for sure, but in a vacuum, it's definitely, I would say, the best deck right now. Giratina, Darkrai, and Guzzlord tied for the second most played decks at basically 10% meta share. Both were about 50% win rate. So, these are deck lists that maybe didn't do as well against the entire field, but specifically were strong into Suicune and Greninja. They ended up with about a 50% win rate. Again, this is 1 tournament, so nothing to blow out of proportion for sure. Guzzlord ended up winning. Giratina, Darkrai got 4th, and I think Suicune got 2nd, right? So keep that in mind. 45 people playing Guzzlord. Dark Turbo Arceus was actually the 4th most played deck, tied for the 4th most played deck with Turbo Flareon. So a couple of Turbo decks up here at about 5% meta share. Turbo Dark Arceus actually only had a 40% win rate, which is Definitely not great, and I think a big reason for that is that Guzzlord can just sort of tank a hit and then grindcore you, and then you're probably in a pretty tough spot. I think that probably had something to do with it, but Turbo Flareon still a 51% win rate, went 101 to 97. Turbo Flareon always ends up doing well for whatever the reason. The next most played deck here, they're the sixth or fifth most played deck. No, sixth. Yeah, the sixth most played deck was Raikou Pikachu, so we had some influence over the metagame here. About a 44% win rate, 69 and 87. Definitely not a great showing for Raichu and Pikachu. I'm actually curious here. I want to go ahead and take a look at our matchups. Okay, so we actually only went 50-50 into Suicune, which again, definitely doesn't feel as good as it probably should. Maybe Suicune was sort of building their decks to kind of counter the Repel Raikou stuff. We'll have to see. Who knows, but definitely not a great matchup into Guzzlord or Giratina Darkrai, and then that's probably a big reason why the deck probably struggled because it didn't take advantage of the Suicune matchup. So this Raikou deck, maybe it's gone and past. Maybe it's not the time to be playing Raikou and Pikachu or Tapu Koko anymore. Maybe Suicune has adapted. Who knows? You know, we don't know what's going on. But anyway, I did go 50-50 into Suicune myself. So maybe this isn't something that we kind of consider playing. Maybe we move into the Guzzlord meta. Who we'll have to see for sure. But anyway, next up was Tapu Koko Oricorio, which did actually have a 52.7% win rate, so maybe Tapu Koko is the sauce. Buzzwole here actually still saw a little bit of play. It was 11 people played it, 2.4% of the meta share, 45, almost a 46% win rate, so nothing too great for Buzzwole. And then Dragonite. There's actually a couple of different Dragonites here. It was split up across a couple of different versions, but this version of Dragonite here had a 43.34%, or 43 to 34 record, and that's actually a 53% win rate, amongst the highest actually out of most of these decks. Silvally Rampardos did quite well here. Espeon struggled. Raikou Magnezone did fairly well as well. Raikou Tapu Koko. So if you're playing two copies of Raikou, or two copies of Raikou and two copies of Tapu Koko, those players went 19 and 18 here. Turbo Flareon with two Sylveon actually went 32 and 23, so Flareon did very, very well. Now, Suicune with double Giratina actually went 12 and 30, so a very bad record for the Suicune decks playing two copies of Giratina. Maybe that means something. Maybe, of course, maybe we move off of Giratina entirely. We'll have to see. Maybe that makes sense for Suicune moving forward. The Umbreons went 15 and 9. So there is the overall records here. If we take a look at Top Cut, we see that Suicune was actually definitely the most well-performing deck into Top Cut into Day 2 or Phase 2. Actually went from 22% meta share to almost 33% meta share, and actually went 43 and 22 in Top Cut. So Suicune's still really dominating, still a very, very dominant deck. Guzzlord actually, though, outperformed it a little bit, 16 and 7 with 12% of the meta share. Still tied with Giratina Darkrai, which is funny. They both still tied in Day 2 for their meta shares. Both did well, 70% win rate, 63% for Giratina Darkrai. Tapu Koko Oricorio went 9 and 5 in Day 2. Dragonite went 50-50. Flareon 6 and 4. Turbo, or rather, Silvally Rampardos went 7-3. Turbo Flareon here with Sylveon went 5 and 2. And yeah, there we go. This Dragonite player, this was the one player playing Sylveon in their Dragonite list, making it into Day 2. They went 5 and 1, of course, got 4th place. And then, of course, the one Raikou Magnezone player went 4 and 1 as well, so had a pretty good run. A really interesting tournament, guys. A really, really fun tournament. I had a really great time, but I think what it showcased was that this meta right now, although still pretty dominated by Suicune definitely a very dominant deck, probably still the best deck right now, has opened up or changed the meta in a way that has allowed a bunch of different types of decks to be somewhat relevant. If we take a look here, there was literally 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different decks were all in the top 6, right? So literally like every single deck in the top 6 was a different archetype. And then of course Suicune and then a bunch more other different decks were in top 16 and top 32. So that's really cool. A really unique, I guess, results for this tournament. And to be fair, I think that there's a lot of strong decks in this season. And I think that this season's really balancing out in a way that I didn't expect very early. So I think a really, really fun metagame that we're in right now. And I think as we go into like week 2, week 3, and then of course as we wrap up in week 4 of this season, we're probably going to see just a massive variety of top tier decks. We actually had that last season. We'll talk about it in tomorrow's tier list. But I think that from B tier, A tier into S tier, there's probably like 30 decks. Like there's a lot of quality decks right now in the format. Sometimes, somehow we're going to have to like parse all that out and then rank the deck lists, which we'll do in tomorrow's video. That'll be our updated meta tier list going into week 2 for sure. Yeah, a really fun tournament, a really fun event. Thank you everybody for playing. Don't forget to like and subscribe, guys. Comment down below what you guys thought of all of these decks, what you thought of the tournament. I would love to hear your guys' opinions on everything. Maybe we'll do another tournament soon. It was the first one that we did. We talk about tournament results all the time on the channel, so it does make sense to run our own tournament, but it's a big time investment, and of course it's very difficult to make things like this happen. So definitely a lot of fun. But yeah, comment down below. Let me know what you guys think. Let me know what you think of all of these decks. A very interesting results here for this tournament, but a lot of fun. A lot of fun indeed. All the way to I think the tournament started at, what was it, like 10 in the morning, and then went on Sunday and went to like 4 or 5 p.m. So it did go a little bit long. We kind of tried to squeeze it all into one day, but it is, I guess, it is what it is, right? What are you gonna do? What can you do? We just hit 35,000 subscribers as well, so massive thanks to everybody for that. Super cool. Okay, I don't even know what I'm saying anymore. We gotta end the video. Peace out. Have a good one. We'll see you guys later. Stay tuned. Tier list coming tomorrow, and yeah. Bye.